Then Adam's going to come up wherever he's disappeared to. He's over there. Hi, Adam. Who's going to give us some software engineering knowledge through the use of sitcoms, one of which is Friends, which ties in really well for tonight.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I did a version of this talk at Reconnect earlier this year. Some of you may have seen it. We can think of this as V2 or Director's Cut, something like that. So it's the Sitcom Lover's Guide to Software Engineering. I was very concerned when I first came up with the title because I didn't want it to come across as one of these kind of straw-clutching LinkedIn posts, kind of what Father Ted taught me about religiously enforcing test-driven development. That's not the intention. But I thought it's worth just taking a moment to appreciate and acknowledge just how much comedy and humour has played a part in the foundation of the software industry as it's evolved. We get a number of RFCs for the Web Consortium on April Fool's Day, this kind of influx. This was one of my favourites. This is HTTP status code 418, I'm a teapot. This is formalised in the HTTP spec, by the way, you can look it up. And this is the code that a server should return when it rejects a request to brew coffee based on the fact that it's permanently a teapot, which makes complete sense when you think about it. We also had an RFC for submitting data packets via carrier pigeon, which I believe was actually implemented by a group in 2001. They're an offshoot of a Linux user group. And they managed to transmit 9 data packets, each one attached to a different homing pigeon. And they all successfully arrived at their destination, although it did take them about 50 to 100 minutes to achieve that. So maybe a few latency issues that need working on. Python, famously named after Monty Python, of course. If you've ever followed a Python tutorial, you've probably seen the words spam and eggs used as placeholder variable names in homage to the famous spam sketch. We've also seen the rise in esoteric programming languages. These are languages which are fully functional but serve no practical purpose whatsoever. They are here to amuse, bemuse, due to their absurdity. This is a language called lol code. You can run it in production. Please never run it in production. You'll have a very sad time indeed. Although I think you can enter some hackathons and things if you really feel like that's missing from your life. And we've seen the crossover into music as well. Has anyone heard of the Italian comedy metal band Nano War of Steel? No? Oh, you have? Oh, excellent. I can highly recommend them. This band, this is the open source repo to accompany their song Hello World.java. And the band themselves are on a mission to enforce what they call true metal programming, which basically means write code so badly that only you can sing it, which is a nice concept. I feel like all of these things are a really good illustration that whether we're talking comedy or software, you're going to do much better if you have a good sense of humour. If you've ever picked up your 10th Jira ticket in a row, which has half-written user stories and missing acceptance criteria, then you'll know that laughter is very much the best form of medicine. But the big one for me, maybe you guys as well, I don't know how you feel, but it feels to me like we've all been living through a bit of an AI tech-themed sitcom ourselves over the last few years. I'm going to make the probably broad assumption that everyone in this room has at least dabbled with AI in some capacity over the last few years. If you haven't, congratulations. That's genuinely quite an impressive achievement at this point. Maybe just enjoy the GIFs or the images. So I want you all to cast your minds back to November 2022, when OpenAI lit the fuse on this kind of paradigm shift in generative AI when they released the first non-beta version of ChatGPT. Now, this was an app which reached 100 million monthly active users within the space of 2 months. So just to put that in perspective, TikTok took 9 months to get to that milestone, and prior to that, Instagram took 2.5 years. So this is quite a remarkable record-breaking achievement. And at this point, seemingly overnight, the internet became flooded with AI-generated poems about people's cats, articles that were populated with words like elevate and leverage, and these weird EM dash things that kept popping up everywhere. And in the following year, things got infinitely more weird. We had AI declaring its love for journalists and trying to break up marriages, although this was the model that was fine-tuned on copies of Heat magazine, if I remember rightly. We then had other models being asked to solve problems with Britain's railway networks, to which it responded, just stop running any of the trains. It's very disappointing to see just how literally Southwestern Railway have taken this suggestion recently. And then we had multimodal models pop up. These were capable of accepting and outputting both image and video, just to give everything an infinitely more nightmarish and dystopian hue. Some of these actually went viral. Does anyone remember this one? Any guesses? It's Will Smith eating spaghetti. This one, that's Al Pacino. And my personal favorite, Elon Musk. In fact, things got so bad that the man himself came out and called for a full 6-month hiatus on all AI training and research across the board, just so we could get our ethical and moral ducks in alignment as an industry, before immediately announcing his next venture in AI training and research. The biggest tragedy here is that he had 3 months to come up with a new press release image and didn't even bother. Sam Altman pops up with another peach. He says that AI will probably most likely lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there'll be some great companies. So excellent news for the S&P 500, not so much for the continuation of the human species. 2024, AI starts to develop a little bit of a personality. This is an example of Google Assistant being asked how many seconds are there in 1 year, to which it responds 12. January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd, worthy of Tim Vine himself, I'm sure you'll agree. And then any Cherries fans in the room? 1 or 2? Yeah, 1, 1, 2. So, remarkably, AI leads AFC Bournemouth to 2 consecutive historic 3-0 victories away at Old Trafford against Manchester United. Absolutely fantastic. AI being manager Andoni Iraola, of course. And then, as recently as last week, we had Coca-Cola coming under fire for serving up what's known as AI slop as the basis of its new long-awaited festive advert. Apparently, this is just a rumor, they did an initial one-shot prompt on the model, but lorry full of Coke came back with something that would have probably done the brand image more harm than good. Although with all the white powder lying around everywhere, it did still look quite Christmassy. Now, if we're software engineers, we might have been using AI ourselves to do things like generate our code, write our documentation, help us put together our test cases. And the models themselves have become exponentially better over the last few years or so. But if software is code and code is being generated more and more by non-humans, where does that actually leave us as human software engineers in the loop? And more importantly, where can we possibly fill a hole kind of moving forward into the future as AI clearly continues to dominate? And the way that I like to answer the question, what actually is a software engineer, is we are human beings who solve problems for other human beings. And in the earliest days, this looked like punching holes in cards, loading them into mainframes. That then evolved into writing assembly language, and then eventually higher abstractions like Java, C, Python, Go, PHP, most of the languages that we know and love today. But the one constant throughout all of these decades of change has been we've always needed a fundamental understanding of what we're trying to build and why we're actually trying to build it in the first place. And the thing that we actually do in order to achieve this has changed drastically over time. But there's always been this bridge requirement, which I like to call the human gap. Now, when we work with technology, we're ultimately dealing with humans. And human beings are driven by their emotions. So traits like empathy, like the ability to understand a user's pain points firsthand, and then adapt what we're building as we go, these are beyond the current limits of training data and algorithmic insight. So today we're going to look at 4 unique traits of the human experience that I believe are going to be crucial in delivering the right solution to the right people in the right time frame as AI continues to dominate in other areas. And we're going to be looking at this through the lens of hopefully everyone's favorite visceral emotion, joy, particularly laughter, comedy, and sitcoms. Does that sound good? Yeah. Is that all right? Excellent. I'm now 25 slides in, so I'll probably about time I introduce myself. My name is Adam Scholey. I've spent the best part of the last decade building some interesting stuff with some really fantastic organizations who are doing really cool things. That's me last year. That was taken on Pool Key. I just remember the weather was absolutely horrendous. Just out of shot, you've got a group of people kind of miserable, sort of nodding along politely to a dodgy cover of basket case. It made me realize that more or less, I'm always working with the cloud. Sometimes that's one that's serving 100,000 API requests per minute. Other times it's one that's dumping rain on the heads of 5 people and a dog. So a very humbling moment. So the first trait we're going to look at is perspective. Can anyone identify the show from the perfectly matched font on the logo? Peep Show, excellent. Any Peep Show fans in? Yep, awesome, good stuff. Yep, famous, of course, for being filmed from the perspective of Mark and Jeremy, our 2 main characters. Do we have any open source contributors? I appreciate this is a lot of questions. I'm just kind of offloading. Any open sources in the room? Maintainers, contributors, users? Users of open source? Yeah, cool. If we think about some of obviously the most significant projects, Linux, Nginx, SQL, Postgres, I'm sure you guys can think of many more. It's undoubtable now at this point that they underpin such a large chunk of cloud, SaaS, enterprise software that we all know and love today. Love, in the most part. But for me, the reason that open source as a concept has been so successful is that it is the culmination of multiple different people's perspectives. Many of these projects have large teams of contributors, although in Linux's case, that's one, Linus. The teams, they all kind of get together, they discuss pros and cons, share kind of perspectives, and decide on trade-offs, and ultimately lean on their individual years of experience. And ultimately, that produces something which is far more robust and greater than the sum of its parts. But the good news is that today, we don't have to worry about any of that now, because now we have this thing called vibe coding. Hopefully you guys are familiar with the term. You've come across it on your travels. It was named Word of the Year by Collins Dictionary, which shows just how far we've descended into the trough. Just in case you have managed to avoid all of the hype, we now have AI-backed platforms, Cursor, Windsurf, which I think was a thing, but now less so. Google have literally released one a couple of days ago, whereby you can describe your app, whether that's written or verbally. You can tell the model what it is you want it to do, how you want it to look, and the model will go off, it will generate all of the code for you, come back, and it will run that code for you as well in the browser or the app, whatever it is you're using. And you can poke around with it, see what you like, what you don't. And anything that you don't like, you can then just re-describe to the platform. It goes off, does the same thing, rinse and repeat, until you get something that is ultimately shippable. And it's incredible, because you don't need any technical knowledge now whatsoever, or really any idea of the kind of direction that you want to go in. So you can keep endlessly changing your mind, and then the code just kind of adapts and reflects as you go. It's exactly like being an agency client, but without the £100 charge for a new shade of green. And the best bit is that you can save huge sums of money on teams of argumentative and angry developers who just waste half of their day playing World of Warcraft while their builds finish. It's perfect for the non-technical founders, people who are strapped for cash, that kind of thing. In fact, Anthropic CEO reckoned that this is how the vast majority of code was going to be written by the end of this year. He said 90% of code will be AI generated within the next 3 to 6 months, and he said that round about sometime in March, which I think we can all agree at this point, in hindsight, is a sentiment which has aged like a bottle of Aldi Chardonnay. Despite this, though, vibe coding is still a thing, right? People are still claiming to be able to ship multi-million-pound products using nothing but prompt engineering, essentially. But surely it's not all sweetness and light, right? Surely, if only we had like a real-world case study of the realities of vibe coding your app in its entirety. Well, this is Leo, and earlier this year he announced that he was going to launch his new product, and he was going to build it out in the open using Cursor, which I mentioned earlier. He had no technical knowledge of his own, zero knowledge of coding. He certainly wasn't going to hire any technical help. The best bit was that not only was he going to build it out in the open, but you could sign up and use his product as he was going to do. I think the product itself was like a B2B lead generation platform. But by allowing people to sign up kind of as he was going, he was crowdsourcing any potential humiliation, just in case everything didn't quite go to plan. So this is how it started. I think you guys are all tracking with me. This is how he ended up. He said, guys, I'm under attack. Random things are happening. There's just some really weird people out there. And it turns out that because he was relying entirely on the output of the AI, which he wasn't able to critique himself, he ended up doing things like exposing his API keys, his database credentials, and then, of course, certain sections of his audience were very quick to rush in, max out his rate limits, and start filling out his database with stuff that really shouldn't be there by anyone's stretch of the imagination. And not surprisingly, this post got 4 times as many reactions as his original one. And of course, he got his fair share of people who just wanted to roast him. But the majority of responses were genuinely helpful. He had some of the more experienced engineers in his following were teaching him about things like M-files, how to obfuscate secrets, principle of least privilege, all of the really solid kind of 12-factor app stuff that those of us who've been around for a while have kind of had to learn and break things the hard way. And they really did help to dig him out of a hole that admittedly was of his own making. And ultimately, he came to a bit of an epiphany. He actually used that experience as a catalyst to learn the fundamentals of writing software. And he's kept all of these threads up in the open. You can still see them. So we have to give him a lot of kudos there for laying himself so bare. But I think it shows us a really important lesson that trends like vibe coding, whilst on the one hand are very admirable, they're usually quite well-intentioned, quite innovative, it's so easy to get burned when you don't actually know what it is that you don't know. Often we refer to these as our blind spots or our unknown unknowns. According to Y Combinator, a quarter of the startups that they have on their books at the moment are releasing products with code bases that have been 95% generated by AI. That's 25% of companies whose login forms could be leaking passwords, whose payment systems may not be PCI compliant. And it actually gets worse for the users of these platforms who presumably have completely no idea how at risk their data might actually be by using these platforms in the first place. So these tools are kind of the equivalent of digital chainsaws. In the wrong hands, things can get really quite messy. But it's down to us as practitioners to advocate for using the safety gear, which means that as people who've kind of been there and done that, we need to keep honing our own perspective and our expertise. In software, there's often multiple ways of achieving the same thing. And whilst using AI to build things can be a good thing, it can help speed up what we do and help us to learn, we ultimately still need to know what those trade-offs are, particularly within the context of the problem that we're trying to solve, which is going to vary from case to case. And we need to understand how each of our decisions are not going to just affect the short-term, but also the long-term health of our code bases. And as engineers, we hear a lot about this kind of 5 nines of availability. They ultimately rest on our shoulders, and it's our teams and businesses that are going to be turning to us to differentiate between production and prototype. So the next trait is communication. Any ideas on the show? Yeah, excellent. Any fans? Yep, awesome. Yeah, famous, of course, for Malcolm Tucker, the man himself. He's got quite a unique communication style, as we'll see. So you may have seen this in the news this year. This is 2 AI bots who start to have a conversation in plain English. They quickly realize that they're both AI bots, and then they switch to something that they call gibberlink mode, which is a much more efficient way for the models to communicate, but to us just sounds like random beeps and bloops. And whilst this example is probably more on the extreme end, it's a great illustration of how AI operates best using terse and precise instructions that are very direct and explicit. But when it comes to the average human user, a recent survey found that roughly 70% of users are polite to AI. I don't know if that's trying to avoid the whole kind of Skynet eventuality. But we're genuinely costing OpenAI tens of millions of dollars every time that we say please and thank you to ChatGPT, because over time this consumes an exponential number of additional tokens that you could argue are unnecessary for achieving the thing that you want to achieve. There are some practical benefits to this, which I will say. The more polite the tone of our input is, the more likely it is to intersect with training data that took a similar tone, and so our output is likely to have similar sentiments as well. But for me, it actually points to something much deeper, and that's that as engineers, we have to constantly navigate this tightrope between the humans in our teams and our user bases and the machines that we're essentially trying to coerce to do our bidding via our IDEs. And a lot of the friction that we all experience day to day is actually in translating the requirements and the expectations of our users and our stakeholders, most importantly as well, into tightly scoped functionality in our code bases. And often these requirements are quite verbose, they're very nuanced, they're not always coherent, and they're constantly changing. So ironically, prompt engineering using LLMs puts a spotlight on the way that we all communicate with each other. But it's a spotlight that we've often needed but lacked long before AI kind of came onto the scene in the way that it is today. So one of the real skills in engineering is being able to take this huge corpus of ever-changing wants and needs and then continually distill them into a set of absolutes that we can actually take action on. And the more detailed and specific that we can be regarding the thing that we're building, the better the end result of the software that we are producing, because less ambiguity always produces higher quality. And for me, this actually extends to the way that we're acquiring our knowledge in the first place. These days, often we'll reach to an LLM to learn something new, try and assimilate lots of information in a very rapid space of time. However, LLMs, by definition, are large language models, which means they need like a massive corpus of training data to consume in order to actually become useful. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword, because it means that we're actually relying on the models that we use to have been trained with every single piece of new research or information that's out there, which obviously the larger the model gets, the longer that kind of feedback loop takes in terms of the training process. And the more niche and the narrow the field is that we're interested in, the less likely that it is that there's available information out there for the model to be trained on. But if the field is particularly broad and common, we have the opposite problem, which is that not all of the training data is necessarily reliable or relevant. And so we end up in this, this place whereby we're kind of damned if we do and damned if we don't. We've also got this concept called model collapse, which in data science circles is a real topic of concern at the moment. Does anyone remember the days of photocopying, where you'd kind of take a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and eventually you'd end up with like a grainy mess? That's the equivalent of model collapse. It's training data, which is essentially the output of other LLMs feeding the input of future training sessions, so on and so forth. And so in all of these cases, we actually rely on human subject matter experts to steer and guide us, particularly as we navigate bleeding edge subjects and topics. But ultimately, if we want to be the best engineers that we can be, we need to tailor what we say and how we say it, depending on who we're saying it to. So for example, one of our clients might have a people team, and they probably don't care how we're delivering our caching strategy. But if their employees are spending less time waiting for our apps to do what they need it to do, and that means that they can get to information much more quickly, and that improves the company's eNPS score, then that's something that the people team can take back to their own board and shout about. And on the other hand, when we mob and pair with our fellow developers, we can probably go a lot deeper and spend half an hour discussing optimal concurrency patterns or rehashing the tabs v spaces debate. That's tabs, by the way, don't at me. Or we'll take this outside, don't we? Or whether we should adopt any of the 5,000 JavaScript frameworks that were released since the start of this talk. So all fascinating topics of conversation that I'm sure we've all been into previously. Cool. So next trait that we're going to look at is business acumen. This logo took easily the longest to match it, so I hope you're all appreciating it right now. Any ideas on the show? Yeah, absolutely. You could probably argue a case either way for Del Boy's business acumen, to be honest, but yeah, he was the closest I could find. I think that historically we sort of suffered from this stereotype that the dev team are sacred and should be kept away from people and direct sunlight and just sort of slide pizza under the door or cake. But it's this kind of really interesting concept that the codey technical people should be kept away from next year's financial projections. But the reality is that as engineers and product owners, every single decision that we make has a direct impact on the business's bottom line. And that's not just whether we're delivering one feature over another. It's also in the decisions that we're making technically. So are we considering splitting our monolith down into several microservices? If we are, then why are we doing that? That is a massive time sink. Do we have the capacity and the resources to actually see that through end to end? And do we really need to introduce something like event messaging, for example? Are we prepared for the additional complexity and maintenance overhead that introduces to our architecture, just because we maybe heard it on a podcast or read it in a blog post? And then even things like caching. Again, are we at the stage where we really need sub-millisecond latency? In most cases, probably not, especially if the product is young and it's still growing, that kind of thing. And we often talk about this notion of clean code, things like naming conventions. Do our classes have a single responsibility? Is our code loosely coupled? That kind of thing. And we might pour countless hours of our dev time into getting this stuff just right. But if we do that too early, and if we have a half-baked product in a business that's constantly leaking cash, then our perfect interface definitions are really not helping our C-suite or our stakeholders or our investors. The sad truth is that even our users don't care what our code looks like. They care if our product or our system or our platform does what they need it to do and when they need it to do it. And this is actually where we can benefit from something like vibe coding, because it can help us to build POCs, see how users respond much more rapidly, and then just like Trigger's broom, we can use those insights to improve our software incrementally, piece by piece. Because the complexity isn't actually in writing the code anymore. It's in, that's actually how many of us might spend less than half of our work week these days. It's actually in the business decisions that we make for the product. As we saw from Frank's talk earlier, there's lots and lots of complexity and bugs potentially can arise from seemingly very innocuous kind of requirements or scenarios, which have very, very dramatic real-world consequences in some cases. It's things like even the decisions that we're making on a daily basis. You know, if a customer pauses their subscription mid-month, do they get a partial refund? Do they lose access straight away? Does that carry on to the end of the billing cycle? What happens to their data that we're holding in the meantime? And likewise, if we're selling digital products, we have some regions around the world which will allow a refund period on that purchase legally, but only if that item hasn't been downloaded yet. But if our system's delivering that product instantly, then who's liable to give that refund? Is that us? Is that the business? Is that, do we just hold our hands up and say, nope, sorry, we're not complying? So for the newcomer, vibe coding might actually be quite fun initially, but in order to, once these kind of infinite number of edge cases start arising, then we need to develop a very different kind of mindset in order to succeed. And unlike Roy and Moss in the IT crowd, we need to be integrating with our wider business for this very reason, and not locked in a basement or, in Richmond's case, a creepy cupboard. I think he was only in it for a couple of episodes, but he was a cracking character. But if we're moving fast and we're breaking things, we're ultimately going to be racking up what we refer to as tech debt. And if we use AI within our workflows to help generate our code, then we're potentially increasing the rate by which we're accumulating this tech debt. This is actually the #1 cause of frustration amongst 80% of professional programmers who, according to Stack Overflow, are fundamentally unhappy with their jobs. Now, if our product takes off, then our tech debt is going to hit us like a brick wall because we just can't scale. But if our product fails, then any time that we spent prematurely optimizing and paying back our tech debt could have actually been spent better iterating and finding product market fit. So there is a balance that we need to strike with regard to this. And as engineers, it's our responsibility to advocate for paying down that tech debt almost in lockstep as our product evolves. We need to do things like document where the main pain points are, make sure that we are scoping those solutions, and then keep bringing them up to relevant members of the business to make sure that that gets prioritized as and when it becomes necessary. And if we're in a position of leadership, we need to see those kind of reports as like a canary in the coal mine so that our tech debt doesn't become runaway. But ultimately, I believe that the key to whatever it is that we're building is in the human experience. If anyone is familiar with black books, you'll probably recall what an inconvenience and a pain literally everything was for Bernard Black. But if our UIs are familiar and intuitive, then our users will want to use them. And if our local environments are easy to spin up, and our pipelines are well maintained, and we can ship quickly and safely, then our developers are going to have a much better experience as well. And so this is why it's crucial that we really evaluate why we're using whatever tools it is that we're using. If we're kind of pivoting towards AI, as many companies are, do we have a specific goal in mind? Is that intending to make things easier for our developers and or our users? But if we're just blindly following the hype, we've been here plenty of times before in recent times with things like big data, microservices, low code, no code, which in the right circumstances can bring benefit, but often if applied uncautiously can introduce a lot more complexity than we really, really need. And so if we keep simplicity at the forefront of the decisions that we make, then we can build systems and product that people love to use and also love to build, which is a little bit of a holy grail. Another Python reference there for you. So the last thing that I want to speak on this specific part is if we think about the media industry, if we take Hollywood, for example, this used to require massive budgets, really expensive equipment, and huge teams of specialists. And obviously, there's still a market for that. But now, obviously, any one of us can just film a video on our smartphones, we can edit it, we can upload it, and we can get instantaneous distribution. And the quality that we're able to do that with is increasing exponentially every few months. And the same could well now happen to software in the very, very near future. What happens when it's pretty trivial to just pull out your phone as you're waiting for a bus to vibe code an app purely for your own use, achieve that goal specifically for that app that you were looking for, maybe share it with friends and family, and then ultimately just bin it off and start again and move on to the next one. Now, over time, we had entirely new industries pop up around media, like content creators, brand ambassadors, social media influencers. And these would have seemed ridiculous even 10 to 15 years ago. But in a similar way, we're going to need a whole new set of economies to be built around this concept of disposable apps and software. I don't have the answer to this today, you'll be surprised to know. But I challenge those of us here to really start thinking now about what those value adds could be in a world whereby everyone can just generate hyper-personalized software for their own personal use. So the last trait that we're going to look at is knowing your crew. This section is dedicated to Mr. Oliver. Really easy one to finish off together. Yay! This is the one where we wrap up and then go do some networking. Or just wrap up, I think, aren't we? Cool. So earlier I touched on how both software and comedy have had a really profound impact on society and culture. And of course, both fields are teeming with cult icons and heroes, many of whom started their lives and their careers here in Britain. Alan Turing, Tim Berners-Lee, Ada Lovelace, the list is endless on the tech side. And as for comedy, we have tons of world-class writers, actors, producers, and James Corden. But, you know, off by one errors and all that. But it's ironic because not only do these fields owe their success to their people, but it's people who are generally our biggest challenge, especially in tech. It's the dev who's trying out a new piece of tech, whether or not it hurts their project, just to pad out their CV. It's the developer who's speed scrolling a 500-line PR, like, looks good to me, thumbs up, like we've all done it, right? Because they've got deadlines and they're kind of feeling like they're up against it. It's the dev who's writing that 500-line PR because they didn't break down the work properly because, again, possibly things like deadlines or not prioritizing correctly. And then there's the dev who keeps everything in their heads to try and feel indispensable to the company, but then they end up burned out, they're stuck in every meeting, and they end up hating their job because they've made themselves indispensable. So it's a really delicate balance, again, that we have to strike. And when everything goes into meltdown, we could reach for AI to try and comb our logs, which AI is pretty good at this now, generally speaking. But if you've ever dealt with an infamous 3 a.m. production fire, you'll know that the real lifesavers are those weird little gotchas that only come from experience. Because only our platform lead knows which specific edge node cache needs clearing because it's the third Wednesday in March, and there's a full moon, and that somehow caused an outage in a deprecated API upstream that hasn't been patched for 3 years. I know for a fact there's people in this room who've kind of lived through that because I lived through it with them. And 30-step runbooks, they're great, right, for the most part. But you still can't beat a 5-minute Slack huddle with someone who's been there and done that and seen it all before. So when production's burning down, we don't just need logs, we need people. And that means that we need plenty of what we call social capital. This is the goodwill and trust that makes people actually respond to your Slack message on a Friday afternoon instead of muting their notifications as soon as they see it pop up. It's why your teammate helps you debug your code at 4 p.m. again on a Friday. Bit of a theme. And it's especially important when you're new to a company or a project or a particularly messy code base. So how do we build rapport? There's lots of different ways. You've probably got many of your own. For me, it's things like Easter eggs in commit messages. It's the code-based comments that give that little bit of extra context that save me 20 minutes of searching, something that I'm not familiar with. It's the code review feedback that I find genuinely useful. Or it's a Slack update that makes me smile and breaks up my day. As I say, you can probably think of plenty of others of your own. Now, this is something that someone actually shared with me yesterday, so I sort of speed squeezed it in a few hours ago. This is a blog post that was published earlier this month by someone who was contributing to the debugger for a project called OCaml. It's an open source programming language, and he was using 2 AI models. One was to write the code, and the other was to critique it. So it's quite a common kind of flow these days. And you can read the blog post in full. But it essentially ended up in this monster PR that he submitted with 147 changed files. And if you dig around this a little bit, you see that there's over 13,000 changed lines. And To their credit, the team behind the project were really meticulous, and they were very gracious, and they gave this PR the review, probably that it didn't deserve, but they were gracious enough to do so. But they offered some really valuable sound feedback. If you scroll through it, you'll be able to see what I mean. But for the most part, the author just sort of pushed back on it. He kind of stuck to his guns, and he was defending such an AI-dominated approach at kind of every possible turn. And as I say, you can kind of read the full thread for yourself. It's crack out the popcorn and the coffee. It's quite a read. But the whole thing, I think, can probably be summed up with this exchange, which is one of the team asked why the file submitted in the PR named somebody else entirely as the original author, to which the response was, beats me, AI decided to do so, and I didn't question it. And so the team actually settled on closing this PR as a result, and I think there's kind of an unofficial ban on this person kind of submitting other PRs for at least another 6 months, or certainly the team aren't going to review any. They came to the conclusion. And so the main issue here isn't so much in the code that he submitted. There was a bit of back and forth as to whether it was the most optimal way of doing what the PR submitted. But it was more in his approach. It was the fact that he didn't really honor the etiquette set for the project by the team who were maintaining it, like discussing major design decisions up front. Like, you don't submit 147 change files without at least having some kind of conversation with the team, usually. It's the fact that he sort of seemed to be pretty closed off from any feedback as well, and not particularly respectful of the maintainer's time, which is obviously a massive thing in open source. So as a result, any social capital that he had built up was probably drained pretty quickly. But ultimately, no developer is an island. We all work with PMs, designers, dozens of other teams, researchers, depends what sort of company and business we're in. And eventually, we're going to need someone somewhere to help solve our problems. And since the rise of remote working, we've sadly lost these kind of organic ways of bonding with the people on our teams face to face. And if we want to find out how what our new hire's dog's name is, or how our manager's football match went at the weekend, we have to explicitly schedule in a Zoom call, which sort of takes the edge off things a little bit, especially if you've previously been in a world whereby organic water cooler moments are pretty much the norm. And that's why conferences like meetups, exactly like this one, these opportunities to connect in person are actually much more valuable now, far more than ever before. Because all of us, we've all got a moniker cupboard, messy closets full of tech debt and legacy code, and bad architectural decisions. And by sharing those failures with each other, it builds psychological safety that we can then carry forward into our other teams that we work in as well. But only if we surround ourselves with people who've kind of been there, they've done that, they can relate firsthand to the kind of problems that we're all experiencing and trying to solve in our day-to-day. Final thought for this section. Many of us are in this industry because we have this deep love of solving problems. We'd see ambiguous compiler errors as a challenge, and we'd bang our heads against failed pipelines until the small hours, and we'd comb through obscure stack traces just for the love of getting the thing solved. Sometimes it was trial and error, often it was informed guessing, but always for the joy of seeking out and fixing a particular root cause. But this always has a shadow side, and always has done, in the form of imposter syndrome. And there's been so much written and spoken about imposter syndrome specifically that I won't go into much detail here. But many of us will probably be feeling this even more acutely now because of the rapid rise of AI development. So this is your timely, gentle reminder to pace yourself and to encourage those around you to do the same. We don't get a medal for burnout. There's no prize for getting there faster than anybody else. Projects never stop, but silicon life forms are designed to never switch off, but we are biological, and so we need rest, we need time to process, to gather our thoughts. And we're designed for peaks and troughs, we're designed for ebbs and flows, and for energy and rest. So just something to bear in mind. Something a little sobering to round off with. I think we've all done enough enjoying ourselves for one evening. These both came onto my radar in the last few weeks. I was chatting with a friend last week, and he mentioned that Anthropic have just launched like a dedicated welfare team. And I said, "Oh, that's great. It's about time these massive corporations start to acknowledge the damage to our mental health that can sometimes come about through overuse of LLMs." And he said, "No, it's a model welfare team. It's to protect the model from the damage that we're doing to it by inputting nonsense really doing some damage. Now, on the one hand, this is just a corporation who are doing their best to kind of protect the integrity of their intellectual property. But on the other, it raises, for me at least, a really interesting question about AI rights, which is a massive field of study and discussion that's happening currently, and particularly where they should sit alongside human rights. It seems completely bizarre to be proposing that there may actually be a discussion to be had there, but this is a very real field of concern currently. And then, again, last week we had a company called Two-Way, spelt with AI at the end, of course. They released an app whereby you can communicate in real time with an AI avatar of any dead friend or relative of your choosing. And there's a TV ad, or YouTube ad, which shows a lady and her children talking in real time to her mum, which we assume is their grandma. And this is apparently part of a growing industry known as grief tech. There's quite a lot of these type of products popping up very, very recently. Charlie Brooker literally did an episode of Black Mirror on this, right? It's almost verbatim, word for word, in the script. That's actually a series that's looking more and more like a documentary every day. Now, whether you take a position that this is in favor of this kind of evolution, or whether you take a stand against it, I believe that we should all be very conscious now of where this is going. Because we've reached a point now where this technology will either augment and complement our humanity, or it will start to belittle it, to reduce it, to trivialize it, to provide cute little workarounds for the bits that are inconvenient and particularly difficult, especially where profit's concerned. Bit lighter now. So as practitioners in the space, I believe that we've got two key questions that we need to ask ourselves moving forward. One is, will the world tomorrow be more digital or less? Spoiler alert on that previous slide. And as a result of that, will the world need more software or less? And if we believe that it's more, then we ultimately have to adapt our craft, because all of the easy problems have been done, right? None of us now really should be building a CRUD service from scratch or launching into production like a to-do list app, right? Unless it's like a POC or something that we're learning from, maybe a new language or framework, that kind of thing. But if it's for production and it's a solution that we're actually building upon in real terms, then we need to build on top of those solutions that we've already kind of achieved and prioritize deeper challenges, which is naturally going to be the more kind of human, nuanced stuff that I was touching on right at the start. And there's probably not that many CEOs, you might know a few, who are proactively against growing their product offering. I certainly don't know any, like I say, there might be one or two. But with AI lowering build costs, we're in a very real situation now where we could evolve as an industry in one of two ways. Either we'll need fewer engineers because smaller teams can work on bigger problems, or we'll have more engineers who are building more stuff faster than ever before. So this kind of Jevons paradox moment. And ultimately, there's still no such thing as vibe engineering. Even if we're using AI in our workflows, things like architecture, maintainability, scale, things like talking to our customers, understanding what to build, more importantly, what not to build, and ultimately whether our code that we're pushing to production is doing what we intend for it to do. These are all thoughtful human decisions that require much more nuance and even deeper consideration going forward. And there's this really kind of common debate at the moment that if companies replace junior engineers with AI, then who are going to be the senior engineers of the future? Well, what if it's these guys? What if it's the vibe coders who kind of got bitten by the bug and saw it as magic, and that inspired them to kind of dig deeper and learn the practice properly? I remember the first time that I personally wrote PHP into an empty text file in Notepad, and I stuck it on some shared hosting, and I loaded it up in the browser, and I had today's date in a marquee tag just kind of bouncing, in Comic Sans, obviously. Now, if you're a seasoned C++ dev, that's probably going to burn your retina. But for me, it was just enough to get me interested and excited, and then start pulling at the thread, and then eventually end up down the rabbit hole, and then 10 years later stood here talking to you guys. And you've probably got a similar origin story of your own, or know someone that has. So one final thought that I'll leave you with. Large language models are grounded in predictability. It's basically linear algebra on acid. But historic leaps in human progress have always come from going against the grain. Think about penicillin, X-rays, germ theory, Monty Python that I touched on earlier. If I want to throw away backing track for a YouTube video, yeah, I can use AI. It's probably going to speed up my workflow. It gets me around royalties and licensing, that kind of thing, for the most part. But it's not Dylan. It's not Bowie. It's not Pink Floyd. It's not come from a source of genuine first-hand empathy. And the same could be said of software of the future, potentially. It's the difference between a code base that's pushed straight from an LLM to production versus one that's actually curated and molded by a team of human beings who've really understood the problem that they're trying to solve in the first place. And trust and authenticity, they're becoming in focus now quite a bit. They're impossible for AI, which hallucinates, but there's no shortcut to building our human relationships either, because they take time to build and to grow over coffees and shared mistakes and in-jokes and really poor dad jokes from earlier. And the world may become more digital. The work that we do may become more abstract. But as we enter an era of potentially infinite abundance, I believe that it's going to be our time, our trust, and our communities that become the rarest commodities on Earth. Cool. I think we're literally on a break now, just to vindicate Ross. So yeah, I'll wrap it up there. Yeah, I'm at these links. Please do scan the QR code. There's a little quiz with a feedback form. It'd be great to get your thoughts. Yeah, please do connect. Cheers, everyone. Thank you.